So, this is going to be a slightly different video than what I normally put out. Part of this video is going to be something that I recorded previously before the manga ended involving Armored All Might and whether or not it ruined the character of All Might himself. And I believe that some of the points that I made in the video are still very much valid, but towards the end of the video, I'm going to add a few more points based off where we see All Might's character end at the end of the series. So, buckle up, because this is going to be a very interesting ride. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Andrew, and I'm here to talk to you about Armored All Might in the most recent chapters of My Hero Academia, and just talk about everything involving this new development for All Might within the story. And when it comes to what we're going to be discussing, I'm going to be answering 4 crucial questions for why the Armored All Might didn't ruin All Might's character as well as the story of My Hero Academia. And the 4 questions in question are: did the Armored All Might suit ruin his character? Did the suit discredit the idea that Deku could not be a hero without a quirk? Can the suit even exist in the world of My Hero Academia? And why was it not used sooner? And to start off, let's really dive into that first question. Did the Iron Man-like suit ruin his character in reference to All Might? And before we can really answer that question, even though I already answered it, let's dive into why this may be the case. So we need to first dive into the question of what is his character arc / story in the world of My Hero Academia. And some would say that for All Might, it is to learn that he does not need to be a fighter, or that he learns that he can be a hero without fighting. However, I think that is a little bit too specific for the story, just due to everything that we've seen within the story. For instance, we've seen him actually be on the front lines and fighting alongside other heroes, as we saw that he was trying to save someone when we saw Bakugo and Shoto doing their first heroic duties after they got their hero licenses. As well as the fact that even during the final war, he was out there alongside Deku as well as the other heroes in an environment where he could, in theory, have to fight and potentially get hurt. So if that is his story, the story is actually going against that idea that he's supposed to be a hero without fighting. And while the story does show that he is learning that there are multiple ways to be a hero, the story never villainizes the idea that heroism can't be done via fighting on the front lines. So I think a more accurate way to describe his arc is finding his place in the world without a quirk. All Might's journey is realizing that what made him a hero was not the power of one for all, but his beliefs to do good and help people while finding his place. Because the entire first part and first arc of the story is literally All Might talking about the idea that Deku needed a power, aka a quirk, to be a hero, even though he himself was quirkless. And that he had this mindset due to the fact that he had a quirk and was able to be a hero with that quirk for nearly his entire life. And while he was born quirkless, he has spent more time with a quirk than he spent quirkless. And this ties into the idea that while he does not need to be a hero via combat, he was always being a hero that fights. We see that in his backstory, he was willing to fight against villains while just holding a pipe, which shows that he has always had this mentality of wanting to fight even when he was quirkless. So it doesn't make sense for him to lose that ideology even though he is older and has more experience. Because the All Might who wanted to protect people even without a quirk is still the same All Might we see today. And once again, we see that the suit itself allows him to be a hero and fight against the bad guys, which, as I stated earlier, is something that he has always done and has always been a part of what he is at his core. Because All Might would always be willing to fight on the front lines because that's just who he is. And when it comes to the idea that All Might is the type of person who wouldn't be risking his life in this moment because he said that he wanted to live, there are actually multiple instances, even with Dark Deku alone, where he declares that he would sacrifice his life for protecting Deku or his students. And when it comes to him being reckless, All Might in this moment is not being reckless because of what he is doing. All Might risking his life now is not out of recklessness, but out of his drive as a hero. What All Might is doing is really no different from the other heroes putting their lives on the lines for others. So the idea that this is something that All Might wouldn't do and that he shouldn't do should be applied to the other heroes because they're doing the exact same thing. The only difference is they have quirks and he doesn't. But his entire journey is realizing that he doesn't need a quirk to be a hero, very much how Deku at the beginning of the story was still considered a hero even though he didn't have a quirk. tying in his journey full circle. Now, let's dive into the second question, which is, did the suit discredit the idea that Deku could not be a hero without a quirk? An argument that I've seen is that some would say that the suit's existence meant that Deku could be a hero using support items and that having a quirk is not necessary, and that it discredits the idea that the story is saying is that you cannot be a hero using only support items. However, the story never says that he can't be a hero using support items, but implies that it's heavily implausible, and here's why. For starters, All Might believed at the beginning of the story that you can't be a hero without power. However, power is used very much in context of quirks. And while All Might says that you need a quirk or power to be a hero, the story does not say this outright to be true, because All Might realized that Deku was a hero without a quirk. But the main issue is that Deku most likely can't go pro or get his hands on support items for many reasons. Reason 1, he will not have access to the tech even close to All Might because he's not a pro hero. The series shows that only pro heroes, hero course students, and the support course with minimal exceptions. Support items are most likely like items such as chloroform or certain restricted materials, which would be restricted from public use or purchase. And we know this to be most likely the case due to the fact that villains and civilians got their hands on more or less illegal support items, and that because they are not versed in using them, it does not make sense for them to be allowed to be purchased by the public unless certain circumstances are involved. Another reason, support items would cost money that Deku would not have as a student. Aoyama got his hands on a support belt, but that's due to his family's wealth most likely and the specific circumstances of Aoyama's label Nazer leaking out, so a support item is needed not just to make sure that he is safe, but that others are also safe. Another reason is that support items can't be used in the major entrance exams with very few exceptions, once again being Aoyama. Deku would need to get into the hero course to use support items, which he would not be able to use as seen via the lack of support items used during the sports festival and the entrance exam with very few exceptions. And another reason is that the use of support items outside of the hero course, you would need to make them, which Deku currently can't do. Also, we are shown the dangers of individuals not trained in using support items can lead to massive destruction. The only characters that we've seen who are able to use support items, specifically in the sports festival, are people a part of the support course, and the implication is that they made them on their own, aka Mei Hatsume. And along with all of the reasons above that I have listed, Deku would not get into the hero course even if he had support items, most likely because the likelihood that he would get his license is slim with support items alone. We see that those let into the hero course would need to set themselves apart from others, and support items won't allow for him to cut it. And we also need to realize that the suit only existed due to the experiences that All Might had with Class 1A, which is directly a result of him giving his quirk to Deku and this action being the starting incident. All Might was really against support items until he saw how far that they have come thanks to Deku. And even if All Might said that Deku could use support items to be a hero, he would not recommend Deku to do it because his experiences have shown him that heroes who are over-reliant on support gear don't last long. He would not be willing to put Deku in danger with something that couldn't guarantee his safety. And now, going into the next question is, can this suit exist in the world of My Hero Academia? And people may say that a suit like this does not make sense and could not exist, but people also say that the ability to replicate quirks makes other heroes' quirks obsolete. But here's the thing. A lot of the technology within the suit not only exists in the world of My Hero Academia, but also exists in our real world. The AI used in the idea of being a mechanical suit exists via the robots, and the ability to combine and being taken apart was seen via Redestro's battlesuit. Laser tech was seen by the fighter jets when it came to the fight between Tomura Shigaraki and Stars and Stripes, and that the fact that UA can fly means a suit like this is plausible. And while many abilities of the suit are inspired by the students at UA in Class 1A, they are also inferior to the students' quirks in many ways. For the most part, all the support items used are limited to either be one-time use or are heavily restricted in destructive output, defense stability, or quirk use longevity. The support items are weaker, less durable, and can't produce as much quirk byproduct as the quirks and their users alone. The suit can't create its own acid, get constantly harder, or have near unlimited tape. And if we are saying that this suit is replicating quirks, well, normal household items also replicate these quirks. Tape existed before Sero. Impenetrable metals have existed before Kirishima. And we've been able to make our own acid for almost decades. So the idea that these quirks can't be replicated is just very untrue, because the reasonings why these quirks exist most likely is because they've already existed in the real world. And once again, the items are all inferior on their own to the quirks and cannot surpass their limits. And with that, we've pretty much gone through all of the major questions except for one, which is probably the question that people are really asking the most, which is, why was this suit not used sooner? And many people would ask, like, why did he not use this during Dark Deku? Could he have used it to find Deku? Why did he not go and fight with the other heroes during the war? And why not give this suit to someone else that actually has a quirk? And these are some smaller questions within this one, and I'll be trying to answer them as well. Because here's the thing. We see that All Might in Dark Deku was about to fight some villains, but he intimidated them instead. In this moment, he had the suit in his hand and he could have used it in this moment, but we immediately cut away from it because we do not know exactly what happened. As far as we know, he intimidated them, or he could have actually activated the suit in this moment. Secondly, the suit isn't only the suit itself in the briefcase, but is also the car, because the pieces that help boost the power of the suit come from the car. Using the suit would not be beneficial to fighting Deku as well, because even if he had the suit, it would have been overkill. He would want to preserve the equipment as much as possible until the final fight, which is something that he told Deku during the Dark Deku arc, as well as something the Vestiges told him during the actual war itself. And besides that, he can do more good outside of the suit, and he, along with Endeavor and the other pro heroes, were already chasing after Deku, but even the pro heroes knew that All Might was unable to bring Deku back mentally. And that's because even if he were to have the suit, that does not mean that he would have been able or willing to bring Deku back by force. And just as the main issue with all of this, All Might during Dark Deku was not mentally available nor in the right mind to help or think properly. He was very much in the mindset of being self-loathing, and a self-loathing mindset would not be optimal for someone to do the best choices in any situation. And to tackle the idea of why he wasn't fighting in the war, well, that's because the suit required the car to be functional, and warping the car to a different location would have been too difficult and too time consuming. And All Might had to stay behind and most likely act as a communication leader to help bolster the morale of the heroes. Also, the suit was tailor-made to All Might, so no one could feasibly use it, nor could anyone feasibly be able to modify it or recreate it with the limited time provided, since All Might was away from the school for about a month and that they only had a week to prepare. And at this time, the equipment that he most likely imported from overseas, which would have included the car, the suit, and Deku's armbands most likely, were something that he had that entire time that he was away from the school. Also, when it comes to a suit like this, it's meant for people who are quirkless. Also, a suit like this is meant for a quirkless individual because the suit would inhibit proper quirk usage of anyone with a quirk. And this would especially apply to heroes whose main fighting style and how they fight is based off their quirk. And that, as All Might said earlier, being over-reliant on that suit would make them detrimental when it comes to eventually being able to use their quirk, and that could potentially lead to their downfall or death. So it's very much impractical for someone who has a quirk to be able to use a suit, such as a character like Shoto or Bakugo, or even a lesser character like Ojiro or Mina, because the suit directly interferes with their ability to use their quirk. And we've also seen from the previous chapters that the pieces of the car, which are the main replications of these quirks, would not be given out to other characters due to how they only seemingly work with the suit itself as attachments and not singular support items. Also, something else that I forgot to talk about is the idea that if All Might dies in this fight, then it kind of throws away everything that was built up about him needing to live. However, we need to look at this from a few different perspectives. One, when he talks about not wanting to die and that he will live, in reference to him talking to All For One in Tartarus, we later realize that what he wants to do is that he'll use his hand to shape his own fate. That is what he meant. And that this came up during the overhaul arc when it came to Night Eye's prediction, which is that he's going to be dying a very gruesome and horrifying death. However, the argument that people would say is that if he dies in this fight, it proves All Might's ideals to be true, and that he will die, and that kind of goes against the idea of shaping fate. However, but we need to realize why that may not necessarily be the case, because while All Might is most likely going to die in this fight, he was going to die in the fight fighting against a villain. And that could potentially happen, but that does not mean that he isn't shaping his own fate. Because the idea is that what Night Eye sees with his quirk, which is a future set in stone. However, what could actually be happening is people shaping their own fates, and that he is seeing that fate being unraveled. And with this in mind, All Might shaping his fate could be the choice of him continuing to fight and eventually kill All For One, but that his fate may be a little bit more ambiguous. He may live after the fight, so it makes Night Eye's idea that he's going to die fighting a villain not necessarily true, or that his death may not be as gruesome as Night Eye saw it. Because what we get from Night Eye is not actually what happens, but what is told to us. And that slight tweaks to what is being told could be, in theory, changing and shaping All Might's fate, especially if he does it using the exact same hand that he has in this one panel. So, yeah, different shirt, different video, different editing day, doesn't really matter. That is pretty much most of what I wanted to talk about when it came to My Hero Academia's Armored All Might, and that there are still some things that I wanted to add. So I'm going to add a few points that I wasn't able to add sooner, or things that I thought of after the fact with more chapters that came out since I recorded the initial video. And to start off, I wanted to clarify some information when it came to the support items and whether or not Deku could have used them during the entrance exam arc. And while we did not get explicit confirmation that Deku could actually use support items during that part of the actual hero course, and judging whether or not students will be a part of the hero course, what I will say is that most likely the entrance exam would have the same criteria as the sports festival. And during the sports festival, you were unable to use support items unless you were a part of the support course and built them themselves, or if you got written permission to use support items prior, such as when it comes to Aoyama, who had a very specific need to have a support item. So most likely than not, Deku would not have been able to use a support item during the entrance exam, and most likely would not have been able to get into the hero course even at that moment. Also, something else I want to bring up is the reasoning why certain characters didn't use the actual Armored All Might suit, and a point that was brought up is why couldn't they recreate it with a character like Momo? And the idea is that because the blueprints would most likely be needed to create the Armored All Might suit, then Momo could have recreated it using her quirk. However, we need to remember that Momo can only recreate things when she has enough fat in her body, as well as that she has to have a clear understanding of how the actual thing works and everything that involves with it. We see that later on in the actual war, she's able to create a railgun, but with the context of what we have in the manga, that was only possible because she has been constantly eating thanks to Lunch Rush, as well as most likely than not, she would have already had the schematics of the railgun known prior, because that is something that has existed within the world of My Hero Academia, as well as something that exists in our real world. And also to add on to the Momo point, as we see, even when it comes to the railgun itself, while it is a rail gun, it is very simplistic in its nature, and that most likely the Armored All Might suit would be too complex for Momo to make using her quirk at the moment that she is right now. And that the railgun itself required external power, which the suit itself does not need. Ergo, she had pre-context for how to actually build the railgun, but she would have no pre-context for how to build the Armored All Might suit. As well as something else that most likely would revolve around the suit itself is that it requires a most likely specific type of material that Momo may not be able to make, just due to the fact that it seems to be a fictional element that was most likely made with the same components as Deku's mid-gauntlets, which is called condinium, and that most likely she would need that to actually create the suit so that it could be optimized, which we do not know if she has the capability of recreating that specific element and incorporating it into the metal, because we do not know what that metal is, and Momo most likely would not have known as well. So there's that. And I also want to just emphasize the idea that there are multiple ways to be a hero, something that I brought up earlier in the video, and how the final chapter of My Hero Academia pretty much emphasizes the idea that people can be heroes in different ways and not just be a hero that fights on the front line. Because even as crime is on decline, people still want to be heroes and they still want to help, but now they have a different perspective of it, which ties into the idea of what All Might's story was, which is being a hero, but being able to do it in different ways, but still doing what you feel is best and fits with who you are as a person, whether or not that is being a doctor or actually fighting on the front line. And that's pretty much everything that I wanted to bring up with more information that we got with the actual manga ending. But overall, I feel as if the points that I brought up earlier in the actual video and before the final chapters came out is still very accurate and still very much holds water even now. And with that, I want to cut over to my older self to finish off the video with a very poignant point. Alright, and yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts when it comes to this idea that the armored All Might suit ruined All Might in My Hero Academia. I highly do not think that this is the case, especially since this suit was very much foreshadowed earlier on in the series as we saw the students working on the suit, which is very much symbolic for what the suit represents. And I do think that this is something that Horikoshi has had in mind for a while, even if it goes against what people believe. Because I think for the My Hero Academia community, there is this misconception around All Might, and that because he can no longer fight, that means that he shouldn't fight. When in reality, just because he doesn't have power is not going to stop him from fighting, especially since we live in a medium where being a hero is not inherently tied to having a quirk, as well as having powers as seen in the actual real world comics. Characters like Iron Man, Batman, Robin, these characters exist without inherent abilities or powers within their mediums, but they are still considered heroes after the fact. Heck, Tony Stark literally had shrapnel in his chest and was on the brink of dying, but still chose to fight because that was the right thing to do. And when it comes to All Might, he's the pinnacle of these ideals of what it means to be a superhero, willing to sacrifice your life for others, as well as helping people whether they need it or not, because that's what heroism is about. And if he didn't actually do something in this vein in the last part of the story, it kind of goes against his entire character and who he is. Someone who is wanting to save people no matter what and help build a better society. And using this Iron Man suit does not hamper that, if anything bolsters that idea. And that's due to the fact that the entire point of the story, literally in the first chapter, is that you can be a hero without a quirk. And All Might is showing that he is being a hero without a quirk. Sure, it's with a suit of armor, but he is still acting as a hero, and that's what matters the most. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on the topic. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. It's been a long while for me wanting to make this video, so hopefully it is enjoyable to you. So, do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!